Silence is often misunderstood. Many think it's weakness, an inability to respond, or an avoidance of confrontation. But the truth is, silence is one of the most powerful tools you have. When you choose silence deliberately, when you decide not to react, not to explain, not to chase, not to defend yourself, that is not surrender, that is control. That is discipline. That is strength in its purest form. He didn't expect you to stay silent this long because he thought you would come running back. He thought you'd plead for closure, argue your point, send long messages trying to explain how much you cared or how much you were hurt. He thought you'd need answers. He believed he still had power over your emotions. What he never saw coming was your silence, not just for a moment, but for a season, a long, quiet season where you took back everything you used to give freely, your time, your attention, your validation, your voice. When someone is used to controlling your emotional responses, your silence threatens them. It forces them to sit with the consequences of their actions without the buffer of your emotional labor. It leaves them with their thoughts. And when they finally realize that your silence isn't a game, it isn't manipulation, it's healing, that's when it begins to destroy them. Because in that silence is a mirror, a reflection of everything they didn't want to face. Their own inconsistency, their emotional immaturity, their inability to keep something valuable. Silence is not passivity. It is a conscious declaration that you're no longer interested in chaos, that you are not available for emotional games, that you've stepped away not because you're defeated, but because you've awakened to your worth. It is you choosing your peace over their drama. It is you choosing to withdraw your energy from what no longer serves you. And what many people don't realize is that silence is sometimes the loudest cry for self-respect. Most people live reactively. Someone hurts them, they respond immediately. Someone disrespects them and they fight back, scream, post, vent. That's emotional impulse. But silence, that's intention. That's strategy. That's wisdom. You're not reacting because you're calculating the value of your energy. You're not responding because you're no longer giving your power away to anyone who provokes you. There is tremendous inner strength required to stay silent when your emotions want to explode, when your heart wants to ask why, when your pride wants to prove something, when your ego wants to remind them what they lost. But you've outgrown all that. You're no longer in the business of convincing people to treat you right. Your silence now speaks louder than any speech you could give. He thought your silence was temporary, that maybe you were giving him time, that you were holding back words, waiting for the right moment. But what he never imagined was that your silence wasn't waiting. It was moving on. It was transforming you. It was building a stronger version of you in the background. While he thought nothing was happening, everything was. You were healing. You were reflecting. You were reclaiming the parts of yourself that were buried beneath compromise and apology. He assumed your silence meant weakness, but what it really meant was rebirth. Silence disrupts patterns. When you used to argue, explain, or defend, you were part of the emotional exchange. You played a role in the emotional script. But the moment you became quiet, the script was broken. Now he doesn't know what comes next. There's no reaction, no validation, no fuel for the fire. It disorients him. It confuses him. Because the attention that used to be guaranteed is gone. And what people take for granted is often only appreciated in absence. There's something deeply unsettling for someone who is used to power when they suddenly lose control of the emotional narrative. He used to know what words to say to spark a reaction. He used to know how to draw you back in. But now, your silence says everything he can't understand. That you're no longer accessible on that level. That your presence is a privilege. And your absence is not a punishment, it's a boundary. People assume that silence means you have nothing to say. But in reality, silence means you've said all you needed to say. You just chose not to repeat yourself. You've expressed yourself in the past, but they weren't listening. Now they want to hear you, but you're done speaking. That's the shift. That's what breaks them. Not just the absence of your words, but the finality of your silence. They didn't expect it to last this long. They didn't expect it to be real. And every day that passes without you reaching out, every hour that ticks by without a message, a call, or a reaction chips away at the illusion they had of control. Because silence is not forgetfulness, it's focus. It means your energy is now invested in something greater, your own peace, your growth, your healing. You're not silent because you're bitter. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word detachment and they think it means not caring, shutting down, or becoming cold and distant. But that's not what it truly is. Emotional detachment, when practiced with intention, is one of the highest forms of self-mastery. It means you are no longer a prisoner of your emotions. You still feel deeply, but your life is no longer governed by reaction. You experience the storm without allowing it to sweep you away. You feel the fire without letting it burn your identity to ash. He thought you'd always be emotionally available. He assumed your heart would always respond the moment he snapped his fingers. He got used to the emotional access you gave him, the comfort of knowing that no matter what he did, you'd still care enough to respond. What he didn't expect was for you to step back, to pull away, not with anger, not with resentment, but with calm, quiet, deliberate detachment. And that's what's breaking him now. Because emotional detachment is not silence out of spite. It's peace out of clarity. There's a moment that comes after repeated disappointment, after trying to be understood, after explaining yourself so many times, where you realize that your emotions have been on a leash someone else is holding. You've been tied to outcomes, to expectations, to the reactions of others. You've been handing over your peace every time someone disrespected you, waiting for them to make it right again. But when you become emotionally detached, you cut that leash. You no longer seek balance outside of yourself. You begin to hold your own center. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It doesn't mean you don't get hurt. It means that the pain no longer defines you. You can love someone deeply and still detach from the dysfunction. You can miss someone and still know that returning to them would cost you your dignity. Detachment is choosing your sanity over emotional chaos. It's stepping out of the fire, not because it stopped burning, but because you finally understood that staying inside it was never going to heal you. He expected a reaction. He always did. He thought you'd be upset, lash out, beg for closure, or try to make things work one more time. That's what you used to do. That was the pattern. But now you're showing him a version of yourself he's never met before. The one who doesn't need closure, who doesn't need to fix everything, who doesn't need to keep proving your worth. You're not emotionally cold, you're emotionally disciplined. And there is a powerful difference between the two. When you become emotionally detached, your decisions start to change. You stop answering calls that disturb your peace. You stop replying to messages that don't carry respect. You stop explaining your worth to people who benefit from your confusion. You walk away not to punish, but to preserve. Because emotional detachment teaches you that peace is not given, it is protected. And often the first step in protecting your peace is removing the emotional investment in people who treat it like a convenience. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after nights of crying, days of overthinking, moments where your heart wanted to reach out, but your soul said no. It comes after realizing that constantly giving yourself to someone who gives you back uncertainty is a form of self-abandonment. It comes after understanding that attachment to someone who triggers your wounds is not love, it's addiction. And detachment is the withdrawal, is the beginning of healing. It's not comfortable, but it's necessary. He never imagined that you'd detach because he thought your emotions made you predictable. He used to count on your reaction. He used to rely on your loyalty even when he wasn't loyal to your feelings. But emotional detachment has changed you. You're no longer available for emotional games. You're no longer pouring yourself out for someone who only fills their own cup. You've started choosing yourself in ways you never did before, and he feels it. Not through words, but through your absence, through the shift in energy, through the silence that's not empty. It's full of boundaries. Detachment also brings clarity. When you're no longer entangled in the emotional drama, you start seeing things for what they truly are, not what you wanted them to be. You begin to notice the patterns, the manipulation, the way you were gaslit into believing you were always the problem. You start to recognize the cycles, and more importantly, you stop participating in them. Emotional detachment gives you the eyes to see and the strength to walk away, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. People often think that walking away requires anger, that you need to be mad, resentful, or broken to leave. But the truth is, the strongest exits happen in silence. They happen with clarity, with calm, with emotional detachment. You walk away because you finally learn that peace is more valuable than presence. You leave because you understand that what you were holding on to was hurting more than it was helping. You stop explaining, stop waiting, stop hoping, and you begin to live. He's confused because he still thinks this is temporary. He still believes the old version of you will show up eventually, but you've outgrown that version. You're not acting detached. You are detached because you've done the inner work. You've cried the tears, you've wrestled with the pain, and you've come to the understanding that healing isn't just about feeling better. Seeing the truth, seeing your values, seeing the cost of staying attached to someone who was never committed to your heart. That's why he's struggling now. Because your silence used to be emotional, it used to be reactive, but now your silence is spiritual, it's mature, it's grounded, it's not a phase, it's a choice. He no longer holds the key to your emotional state. He's not used to this. He's not ready for this, because what he thought was temporary has become transformation. They say silence is golden, but when it comes from someone who used to respond to every call, every message, every emotional plea, that silence becomes a thunderclap. It echoes louder than any argument, any confrontation, any dramatic farewell, and it shakes the very foundation of the one who once took your voice for granted. Because you see, when you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your emotions, stop justifying your reactions, something shifts. Silence becomes your armor. Not because you're hiding, but because you've risen above the need to convince someone of your worth. He's battling with something now that he didn't see coming. Your stillness, your non-reaction, your decision to stay quiet, not because you're hurt, but because you're healing. You're learning that not every emotion needs to be expressed to the one who caused it, that not every heartbreak deserves a poem or a plea. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Not because you don't care, but because you've finally started to care about yourself more than the chaos he brings. People expect noise when they leave wounds. They expect anger, bitterness, words flying like weapons. But when you get quiet, truly quiet, it's unsettling, because it means you started listening to yourself. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're trying to understand yourself. You're not lashing out, not chasing, not begging for answers that only led to more confusion. Instead, you sit with your pain. You breathe through it. You allow the silence to teach you something the noise never could: self-respect. This silence isn't weakness. It's power refined through pain. It's strength that doesn't need to announce itself. You've begun to realize that your emotions don't have to be a public performance, that some wounds need privacy to heal, that some victories are internal. He thought you were retreating out of defeat, but you were simply reorganizing your peace. While he waited for your reaction to feed his ego, you were outgrowing the entire situation. Silently, gracefully, unapologetically. He underestimated how deeply silence can sting when it comes from someone who used to care so loudly. He's not used to this version of you. the one who doesn't rush to clarify, doesn't scramble to fix what he broke. He's confronted now not by your voice, but by your absence. And absence has a language of its own. It says, I am no longer available for confusion. It says, I've learned to find peace without needing to explain the chaos you brought. This silence becomes a mirror. And that's what terrifies him. Because now, with nothing to push against, nothing to argue with, he has to face himself. There's no more drama to distract him from the damage he caused. No emotional energy from you to feed on. Just stillness, just reflection, just the realization that he pushed you too far, and now you've gone somewhere he cannot reach. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. When you were emotionally reactive, he had control. Every response you gave, every tear you cried was a sign that he still held space in your heart. But silence? Silence means that space is being cleared. Not because you stop caring, but because you're done proving that you do. There comes a point when your peace matters more than being heard. When your energy becomes too valuable to waste on someone who refused to listen when it mattered. This is the irony of human behavior. People often don't notice the damage they've done until the noise stops. Until the person they dismissed becomes the person they miss. Until the texts go unread, the calls unanswered, the presence unreplaced. And suddenly the one they thought would always be there isn't. He expected your silence to be temporary, a reaction waiting to end. But what he didn't understand is that this silence was the beginning of your evolution. And here's the truth. Silence is often mistaken for weakness by those who don't understand its depth. But silence is layered. It's reflective. It's a conscious decision to no longer engage in cycles that drain your spirit. It's the manifestation of growth that doesn't need external validation. While he tries to figure out what you're thinking, you're already 5 steps ahead, moving through your healing journey with quiet resilience. Silence can't be manipulated. It can't be twisted or misquoted. It doesn't play games. It simply is. And that's what makes it so powerful. He can't argue with it. He can't deflect it. He can't use it to spin another narrative. All he can do is sit in it. And when someone is left alone with silence, they start to hear things they've long ignored. Their own conscience, their regrets, their guilt, their missed chances. And that's louder than any words you could ever say. You didn't go silent to punish him. You went silent to protect you. And whether he ever admits it or not, it's destroying him. Because now he knows your silence doesn't mean you're waiting. It means you're gone. Not because you shouted it, but because you no longer need to. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't the pain, it's the confusion. The lingering questions, the echo of moments replaying in your mind like a broken record. You wonder if it was your fault, if you could have done something differently, if maybe, just maybe, he would have stayed or changed or at least understood. That confusion becomes your silent enemy, wrapping around your thoughts and tightening its grip. You want closure, but what you really need is clarity. And the painful truth is this: clarity rarely comes from the one who hurt you. It comes from within. When you finally decide to stop waiting for answers and start giving them to yourself. He left pieces of his chaos scattered all over your mind, mixed messages, emotional withdrawals, moments of warmth followed by cold silence. You kept trying to decode it, to make sense of it all, but it wasn't your job to understand someone who didn't care to be understood. It wasn't your role to solve a puzzle that wasn't yours to fix, and as hard as it is to accept, some people don't offer confusion by accident. They offer it because it keeps them in control. The more lost you feel, the more they matter. The more they matter, the longer you stay. But then something shifted. In the silence you chose, you began to confront that confusion, not by asking more questions, but by giving yourself permission to walk away from needing the answers. Because clarity doesn't scream, it whispers. And when everything else gets quiet, when you shut out the noise of what he did or didn't do, you start to hear your own voice again. That voice becomes your guide, your compass. It tells you that you were never crazy, that your feelings were valid, that your instincts weren't wrong. You just ignored them for too long because you wanted love to speak louder than the red flags. The moment you begin untangling that confusion, the healing begins. You start to recognize patterns that once confused you. His inconsistency was never love. It was manipulation disguised as affection. His silent treatments weren't peace. They were punishment, a way to make you doubt your worth. His hot and cold behavior wasn't emotional complexity. It was emotional immaturity. And you see it clearly now. Not because he explained it, but because you finally stopped needing him to. When you stop asking why he treated you that way and start asking why you tolerated it, that's where transformation lives. Not in blame, but in responsibility. Not in victimhood, but in ownership. Because the truth is, healing from confusion is about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away hoping someone would stay. It's about realizing that people who love you don't leave you in the dark. They don't make you guess. They don't silence your voice or punish your sensitivity. They meet you in your clarity and build something real from it. Clarity hurts sometimes because it often reveals things we didn't want to see. It shows you that the person you love was not who they pretended to be, that the relationship you held onto was built more on potential than reality, that you fell for the idea of someone more than the person they truly were. But that kind of pain is cleansing. It washes away the illusions. It cuts through the emotional fog and leaves you with truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is always a better foundation than fantasy. You start to see that not every I love you came from a place of depth. Some came from a place of convenience. Some came to keep you around, to keep the supply going, to keep their ego fed. And as ugly as that truth is, it sets you free. Because now you can stop twisting yourself to fit into a story that was never meant for you. You can stop performing emotional acrobatics to win a place in someone's inconsistent heart. Healing from confusion is about alignment. It's about aligning what you feel with what you know. You knew something was wrong. You felt the dissonance. But your desire to hold on was louder than your wisdom. Now your wisdom is rising. It's taking the front seat. And as painful as it is to let go of a person, it's far more painful to keep holding on to someone who lets go of you every time it's inconvenient. Clarity brings you back to yourself. It doesn't happen overnight. It comes slowly, like the sun rising after a long night. You may still wake up with questions, but they won't sting as much. You may still think about him, but it won't shake your core. Because now you understand. You're no longer looking backward to make sense of it. You're moving forward with new vision. You're choosing to create peace over seeking answers. You're learning that not all closure comes with a conversation. Some closure happens the moment you stop chasing it and decide to close the chapter yourself. It's not about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about finally being honest with yourself that it did and choosing to heal anyway. Choosing to grow anyway. Choosing to love yourself enough to release what confused you so you can make room for what brings you peace. That's how you reclaim your power. That's how you find your footing again. Not through confrontation, not through emotional battles, but through clarity, through the quiet decision to let your healing speak louder than your heartbreak. There's a unique kind of power in silence that most people will never understand, especially those who once fed off your reaction, your emotion, your vulnerability. When you used to speak, it gave him control. Whether it was through an argument, a breakdown, or your need for clarity, it gave him the attention and energy he needed to keep playing his games. But the moment you stopped engaging, the moment your voice went quiet and your energy returned to yourself, something inside him began to panic. He didn't expect the silence to last. He expected you to eventually break, to reach out, to explain yourself, to ask for closure. But this silence is unfamiliar territory to him. It's not passive. It's not weakness. It's strength wrapped in stillness. And it's breaking him in ways your words never could. Silence speaks volumes when it comes from a place of clarity. It's not about avoiding confrontation. It's about refusing to entertain confusion. When you go silent, you stop feeding the cycle. You stop giving your power away to someone who only valued you when you were reacting to their neglect or inconsistency. That silence is your way of saying, I no longer need to be heard by someone who was never truly listening. It's a turning inward, a reclaiming of dignity, and the person who once relied on your emotions to fuel their ego suddenly finds themselves in a drought. Nothing is more unsettling to someone who thrived off control than the loss of access to the emotional supply you once gave so freely. He thought he understood you. He thought he had read your patterns. He had studied your emotions like a book he'd read before. He knew how to trigger you, how to make you doubt yourself, how to twist things so you'd end up apologizing even when he was wrong. And for a long time, that manipulation worked. But now, in the silence, all those games are crumbling. Because silence isn't a reaction. It's not fueled by anger or heartbreak. It's fueled by awareness. And when awareness enters the picture, manipulation loses its grip. You no longer flinch when he withholds affection. You no longer explain yourself when he disappears. You no longer chase after someone who made you feel like you were hard to love. And that shift, that quiet internal shift, it unravels his power completely. He's left sitting with his own thoughts now, replaying everything he did, trying to figure out why the silence is lasting longer than he expected. And here's what he doesn't realize. You've changed. You've grown in the silence. You've faced the hard truths about your attachment, your patterns, your self-worth. You've had the conversations with yourself that he refused to have with you. And in doing so, you've built something he can't reach. Peace. That peace isn't loud, but it's disruptive because it represents everything he tried to keep you from finding. You're no longer the same version of you that tolerated mixed signals, unanswered messages, broken promises, and half love. You've evolved, and he can feel the distance, not just physically, but energetically. There's a storm of insecurity brewing inside him now. The same man who thought he had you figured out is now second-guessing his every move. He's wondering if you've moved on, if you found someone better, if you finally realized your worth. And the silence won't confirm or deny any of it. That's what makes it so powerful. He can't manipulate what he can't access. He can't argue he can't distort a message that was never sent. That silence is like a mirror he's forced to look into, one that reflects the emptiness he tried to cover up by controlling you. It's in this space that you start to truly understand the value of emotional detachment, not in a cold, heartless way, but in a self-protective, wise way. You begin to see how much of yourself you had been giving away in the name of love. And with every silent moment, you take another piece back. You stop giving explanations. You stop breaking your own heart trying to fix someone else's damage. You stop trying to prove your love to someone who didn't respect it when it was freely given. And he can feel that withdrawal. He can feel that shift in energy. It rattles him more than any confrontation ever could. You see, some men expect you to always be available emotionally. They expect that no matter how they treat you, you'll still pick up the phone, you'll still check in, you'll still forgive. And that expectation becomes their downfall. Because one day you stop, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You realize that the more you stayed connected to him, the more disconnected you became from yourself. And now that the silence has taken root, you're remembering who you were before the pain, before the confusion, before the emotional chaos. That remembrance becomes your freedom. And while he sits there waiting for the version of you that used to chase him, that version no longer exists. You buried her in the silence. What stands in her place is a woman who no longer needs to speak to prove her worth. A woman who has learned that sometimes the loudest message is the one never spoken. There is a quiet transformation that takes place when you begin to heal in silence. Not the kind of silence rooted in bitterness or avoidance, but the kind that comes from deep reflection and inner strength. You start to realize that your peace is more valuable than the temporary satisfaction of being heard by someone who never truly listened. The silence that once felt like a punishment now becomes your sanctuary. And it's in that stillness, in that retreat from noise and conflict, that true clarity begins to emerge. You no longer seek validation from the same hands that once caused you pain. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to someone who twisted your truth for their convenience. You begin to trust yourself more deeply, not because someone finally saw your worth, but because you did. This kind of silence is sacred. It's where your thoughts become clearer, your heart becomes lighter, and your soul becomes free from the emotional chains that used to bind you to people who didn't deserve your loyalty. You begin to realize that the person who hurt you, who ghosted you, who manipulated your emotions, never had power over you. The real power was always within you. It was just buried beneath your desire to be loved, to be chosen, to be enough. And once you stop reaching for someone who kept pulling away, something inside you shifts. You're no longer chasing closure because you've closed the chapter in your heart. You're no longer haunted by unanswered questions because peace doesn't require explanations. It just is. Healing in silence teaches you what no conversation ever could. It teaches you that you can feel pain and still move forward, that you can miss someone and still not let them back into your life, that you can carry memories without letting them dictate your future. There's a kind of discipline that comes with choosing not to respond, a kind of mastery that's born when you stop trying to fix what you didn't break. And it's in that mastery that you find yourself. Not the version of you that they wanted you to be, but the version of you that always existed beneath the pain. Resilient, self-aware, emotionally mature. You begin to realize that not everyone deserves access to you, that your energy is precious, and who you share it with will either water your growth or drain your spirit. You stop entertaining confusion. You stop excusing disrespect. You stop accepting crumbs and calling it love. You begin to choose differently, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You've seen what happens when you give too much of yourself to someone who's only halfway present. You've felt the emptiness that comes from being emotionally available to someone who's emotionally absent. And now you protect your space like a fortress, not because you're cold, but because you're healed. There's a moment in your healing when you look back and realize just how far you've come. Not in terms of external achievements, but internal victories. The night you cried yourself to sleep but got up the next morning. The days you felt alone but kept showing up for yourself. The times you wanted to call or text them but chose your dignity instead. These are the quiet battles that shape you. These are the unseen triumphs that define you. And while he may never see the depth of your growth, that doesn't matter anymore. Because you didn't do it for him. You did it for you. In this silence, your priorities shift. You no longer fantasize about revenge, closure, or recognition. You're too focused on your healing, your evolution, your peace. You start investing in yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. You read more. You rest more. You speak less, but your presence says more. You start surrounding yourself with people who see your worth without having to be reminded. People who match your energy, not manipulate it. People who build with you, not break you down. And suddenly, the silence becomes your filter. Anything or anyone that disrupts your peace simply doesn't make it through. You also begin to observe people differently. You no longer get attached to potential. You watch their actions more than their words. You see red flags without painting them white. You recognize manipulation without needing to confront it. You know when someone's energy doesn't align with yours. And instead of trying to fix them, you walk away, not with anger, not with drama, but with grace. Because you've healed enough to know that your peace is not worth sacrificing for temporary companionship. And that lesson, though learned in silence, is louder than any apology you never received. It's a subtle but powerful transformation. You start becoming more intentional, more present, more protective of your time and energy. You find yourself letting go of old stories, old wounds, old versions of yourself. You begin to trust that what's meant for you won't require you to lose yourself, and that anything that costs you your peace is too expensive, no matter how much history or emotion is attached to it. The silence becomes your compass, guiding you away from chaos and toward clarity. It's not about becoming hard, it's about becoming whole. Not about becoming bitter, it's about becoming better. You no longer seek to be understood by those who never took the time to know you. You understand yourself now, and that understanding is enough.